last resort. I suppose people don't really change. It is mostly the circumstances, most of which are beyond our control, that give the illusion of personal change. I suppose Claire and I were never supposed to be together. It was all the pandemic, which had us make some quick choices about moving in and pushed us together. In 2022, when most of the shock and terror of the disease began to subside and the new normal looked a lot like the old normal, we found ourselves drifting apart. It was just the little things at first. We could be social and do things again, and then it was many of our interests and habits were at odds with each other. I guess you could say it's hard to know your partner is a party girl when nothing is open past 6 p.m. for almost a year and a half. It's hard to get to know somebody when they're not themselves. It's easy to focus on the apocalypse sex and realize that there's just now, and where this is going has no meaning when it really felt like the world was coming to an end. I'm not blaming her. I should have listened to her when the lockdown started. I should have listened to her about all the things she said she would miss, and I guess I ignored it, or maybe I was afraid. Between all the insanity of those months, we weren't ourselves, and not ourselves seemed to like each other just fine, or at least we both desired company in a world where human contact was so strained and seemed so dangerous. Anyway, we were on a road trip that we had planned but couldn't take, back in the spring of 2020. Basically, we just packed the bare essentials, left the city, headed out in a new direction in the hopes of finding adventure. I think we both knew what this really was, though. It was the last chance, the last ditch, the final countdown, the last opportunity to salvage our nearly 2-year-long relationship. A chance to find something worth preserving, or at least some way of saying we tried. We spent hours driving through the winding country roads, but it felt more like walking on the eggshells. What song to put on next? How far was too far? How long was too long to go before stopping for the night? As we nervously disc jockeyed, trying to find something each other wouldn't hate, it started to rain and storm. The rain and wind was getting so bad that even with the wipers on full, I could barely make out the road. A large branch blew down just ahead of us, and I swerved into a muddy ditch. We struck a tree stump, and the damage was so severe, it cracked the radiator, cracked the battery, and set off the airbags. Clara was screaming, and I was running a long list of loud obscenities through my head as I struggled to get the door open against the airbag that had rug-burned my arm and forehead. In a miraculous turn of events, the violent storm cleared to an early evening sky, just as quickly as it had arrived and stranded us. I pulled Claire out of the passenger seat and back onto the road. I slipped and fell in the mud as I struggled to pull our backpacks out of the trunk. We didn't know where we were. That was sort of the point. We had planned just to wing it, like I said, but it was supposed to be a relaxing, romantic trip. Now it had become an endurance contest, one which we seemed to have both lost very quickly. My phone was dead, and Claire's phone was smashed out of the holder during the crash. Well, I said in a bitter voice, awash in shock and pain, we wanted to get some hiking done this trip, right? I handed her one of the 2 walking sticks that we brought. It was getting dark. After a short argument of which way to head, either back the way we came or to press forward because we knew for certain that the nearest hotel was probably at least 3 hours on foot backwards and that the next town was closer, even though neither of us knew how much closer, or if they would definitely have a place to stay, but either case, it was a place to regroup, hopefully, eat, and charge the one working phone and get some help. Claire was brooding and silent for the hike. Every now and then I'd glance back and see her pull out her phone out of habit, only to scoff and groan and put it back. She wanted to talk to somebody, but I knew that somebody wasn't me. My mouth was dry, and I was getting a headache from clenching my jaw. I tried to make a joke about our music after an hour of shuffling across the mostly gravel road, but no one laughed. We hadn't seen another car in 2 hours. The sun set fast under the evergreen tree line. The orange and red horizon resembled a wall of Aztec glyphs. Clara was getting tired and said she was getting sore feet. I was equally sore and tired of swatting mosquitoes. I told her to focus on the sky and that we were probably getting close. We rounded a slope and the road forked. We both whispered, "Shit," under our breath, knowing we had no way to be certain of which way to go. Claire had a flashlight, and she shone it on the gravel for any sign of more rare or recent traffic. By that logic, the most worn or recently used part of the road probably led somewhere, as opposed to the other way. And then we saw it. A little glimmer in the overgrown weeds lining the road. It was just a little sign, brown and partially rusted, but it still had a reflective metal surface. And it was just a little cabin symbol, and an arrow pointing right, reading .4 miles. I stepped up and told Claire we'd be there in about 20 minutes if we hiked fast. The little cabin was the state's universal symbol for lodging of some kind. I don't know if we were heading towards a state park, a private retreat, or something else entirely, but it was someplace, hopefully. Hopefully someplace. What we found when we got there was unimaginably wonderful. It was an enormous multi-acre, log cabin-themed resort tucked into a clearing. I rubbed my eyes as we walked through the giant wooden doors into the dimly lit lobby. There was a staff member behind the wooden counter working on some kind of paperwork. She was dressed in a short-sleeved white uniform adorned with silver rings around the triceps. The outfit was complete with a strange white hat that resembled a tooth, almost like a molar. I cleared my throat so as to not startle her. She continued to do what she was doing, but my noisy throat activated a softly illuminated kiosk behind the front desk. "Welcome to the Evergreen Resort. What would you desire?" It was a touchscreen terminal which let us register our names as well as get a room with a credit card. I wasn't sure about the layout of the rooms, but they said they only had one variety to choose from. I suppose I was grateful to be anywhere lit up, dry, and indoors. The kiosk displayed a map of the sprawling resort, highlighting the various amenities like the pool, the restaurant, a bar, and even a spa. And then it gave us step-by-step directions to our room before it spit out 2 plastic key cards. After getting the keys, I looked up to yell thanks to the staff member, but she was gone. The halls were decorated in a rustic log cabin pioneer theme. Faux candlelights mounted on walls provided a flickering calm. Claire stirred ahead of me. She looked perked up. Once or twice she looked back to me, her face washed clear of the shock and anger from the crash and the long hike. Her smile brought one to my face as well. A few moments after we found and then opened and then shut our door, we had done something we hadn't done in a long time. We made out like horny prom dates before the room's automatic lights flickered on. The light hit our faces and she took a step back. She flashed a crestfallen look before exclaiming that my face and forehead looked like I spent the day at a Florida beach. I rubbed it and it brought the sting back. I explained I was hit funny by the airbag. She pulled out a first aid kit from her camp bag and handed me a wipe with some kind of anti-inflammatory agent on it. "Hey, how about we get cleaned up and call in about the car and then we go check out the bar and have something to eat?" Claire collapsed cross-legged on the bed and yawned. "Believe it or not, I'm not super hungry." "Yeah, but don't you want to get out and explore this place and maybe meet some folks here?" Claire shrugged. "Yeah. I feel like taking a little nap. That whole car ride and the crash took a lot out of me. And besides, we're probably going to have to be here a few nights till the car's fixed. There's no real rush, right?" "You make that sound like it's a bad thing." "This place seems pretty great to me, just what we wanted." "I didn't say it was a bad thing. This place is everything I imagined it would be." With that, I knew somehow this actually wasn't what she wanted. She wanted something else, and now that I tipped my hand that I liked it here, she wouldn't say she wanted to do or where she wanted to be. I don't get it. She seemed pretty happy about something just a minute ago. I suggested we get out and meet people to try to meet her halfway. I wanted to engage, but she fell back on the pillow and rubbed her eyes, and she turned her head towards the window, towards the smear of dark blue and green and purple of the forest twilight. I was still caked in mud, and I just realized I needed that shower. As I showered, thoughts raced in my head, the same thoughts I had flying down the interstate and whipping around those country roads. The same thoughts I had curating each song and trying to tune my reactions to her song choices. The engine light was already on, and now the front end was smoking. Even a perfectly executed getaway wasn't going to fix this. It wasn't fixable. But I wanted to fix it. But she had to want it too. And she came along, but still, she was into you, right? Let's try it again. I sighed to myself as I pulled on clean clothes and prepared to exit the steamy bathroom. I noticed that there was a little wooden table next to the window, and on there was a note that said, "I'll meet you in the lounge." I grabbed the only nice button-down shirt I had packed for the trip out of my bag, patted myself down for my keys, my keycard, and wallet. I remembered from the front desk kiosk the layout of the resort was essentially a giant loop with 3 main lodging units and a 4th large unit with the spa, pool, and the bar. Basically set up at the 4 cardinal direction points on that loop. Connecting these units were long, winding hallways with large glass windows and benches to sit and view the wilderness that the resort seemed to be weaved, carved, and tunneled into. I ambled through the corridor of my unit. Before lie an endless stretch of identical doors with glowing green keycard ports. I stopped only once or twice to muse at the strange numbering of the individual rooms. From the best I can tell, the whole resort had over 1,000 rooms, but instead of them being numbered in a way that would make sense to somebody staying at the resort who might get lost, they seemed to be randomly assigned with room 1200 right next to room 387. And then for a pattern of 1200s to resume, only to be broken against 10 doors down, a 500 numbered room. The other thing that caught my eye was that for such a massive place, it was virtually vacant. There were virtually no other guests, and so far I'd only seen the one staff member at the lobby desk. Also, for as huge and expensive as the place appeared to be, I had never heard anyone talk about it, or had seen an ad for it before. It was just out here. The Long Lake Lodge was a massive space adorned with a mix of rustic fishing and cabin decor, with huge wooden beams hoisting a vaulted ceiling over 2 floors of bar and restaurant space. Canoes, models of large fish, and wagon wheel chandeliers hung from the beams over a dozen picnic bench-like tables and seats. Fishing poles, antique beer signs, and a collection of aged fishing lures bedazzled the walls. The whole place was eerily still, and, much like the rest of the hotel, completely vacant. The air felt fake and stale. It was hard to put a finger on it. I felt like I was walking into a photograph. In the corner, there were 2 staff members speaking behind one of the bars in the corner. Their backs were turned to me, and despite the quiet of the cavernous restaurant, I could not make out their murmuring. In the far corner by the window, I spotted a bag and Claire's hand. Aside from the table marked complimentary house beverages and appetizers, which included glasses for open chilled champagne, free beer, and even a house-labeled bourbon, I could not have felt more unwelcomed in that moment. I struggled for a moment, deciding on what to pour myself and what to bring Claire. After picking up and sniffing the bourbon, I went and I poured 2 glasses of champagne. Like most people, we drank much during the lockdowns and mostly kept in our lanes. Maybe it was time to branch out and try something that she liked. I found Claire scarfing down her fifth of 8 large shrimp from the shrimp cocktails on display at the complimentary table. Beside her discarded tail plate was a mostly full glass of bourbon. "Hey, I brought you some champagne," I said, sitting down. "I finally tried some bourbon," she said between chomps. "I don't get it." "That's fine. There's not much to get." "I feel like I'm drinking the color brown and cough syrup. Like one of those markers that are supposed to smell like something. But it's how those markers taste is what I think about this." I pushed one of the champagne glasses across the table to her. She looked at it with contempt. "No, I think I'm good on champagne. I think the whole situation kind of ruined it for me." "Do you want something else?" Like the question I should have asked directly maybe a month or even 2 months ago. It was just out of context. But for the first time in a while, we were actually on the same page. At least I think we were. "What do you want?" she retorted. I sat there, looking at her, long past any game show buzzer would have gone off. If you don't know, then how can I know?" she asked. "Maybe your taste for champagne wasn't the only thing ruined during the pandemic." "It's a shame, still." I stopped myself. "It's a shame I still have a taste for bourbon," I said, lifting the towering glass of brown liquor away from her into my lips. "Is the shrimp any good?" I asked her as I stared into her reflection. "I was hoping for something warm, but I think they're done serving tonight or short-staffed or something. I'll go over and ask the folks at the bar and see if they'll make us something." "What folks?" she asked. I looked up and back and discovered that the 2 staff members at the corner bar were gone. "Well, tomorrow we'll get up early and come down here for some hot breakfast, have some potatoes and bacon and pancakes, and then we'll go see about the car." "Yeah, that sounds good." She stood up. "I'm going to head back to the room and get some sleep." She left, and I drank my dinner, and then I stumbled through the amenities area and back into the hallway loop. I must have been pretty drunk, because I made one funny turn and got turned around somehow on the loop. I also tripped over a shallow set of stairs that I don't recall going up earlier on the way back. Fortunately, no one saw and no one heard me swear. The room numbers were so confusing to me, and I doubled back twice thinking I was headed in the wrong direction, even though I remember they were confusing before. Got back into the room, and Claire was sprawled out on the bed, sleeping so soundly. I remember thinking to myself that I must have been really hammered bad because the bed seemed to be half the size. There was no way I was going to aggravate our situation further by pushing her aside, so I basically just passed out on the chair in the corner. I woke up slowly in the morning light streaming through the curtains. Within a few seconds of the warming sun hitting my face, I knew something was amiss. It had been close to noon, because our room was surrounded by tall trees and the sun would struggle to peek over them any time before at least 11:30. And then panic struck me. We did not have a room facing east. I leaned up from the chair, and only by the virtue of my mild hangover that I didn't spring to my feet. There was nothing directly below my feet. My eyes darted left and right to see my chair hanging over a loft that was simply dropped down to the center of our room from nearly a story up. I didn't understand how I got there, or how the loft got there. We didn't have a room with a loft. I pushed myself back in the chair and hopped onto the floor and realized there was no way to get down from this loft except to jump. There were no stairs, and oddly there was only a door, an exit door, presumably that led out into the hallway of the second floor of this unit. I wasn't even sure which unit we were in anymore, because it wasn't our unit. Claire! Claire, wake up, wake up! I started yelling. "Something really weird is going on, wake up!" Claire violently kicked off the covers of her and spun her head around the room before her eyes darted up to mine. Her face contorted to bewilderment. "What the hell is going on? How did you get up there?" Before I could reply, the room started to warp around us. I wasn't moving, but the room definitely was. The loft was being lifted higher, or the main part of our room was being lowered. In either case, the gap between us grew. What was maybe an 8 or 10-foot drop to the bed was now getting to be a much more dangerous 15 or 20-foot plummet. My room, my part of the room, began to rotate. The walls were beginning to close off and wrap around us, sealing off between Claire and myself. "Claire! I don't know what's going on. I'll find you, and we'll figure this out. Claire!" It was no use. I found myself screaming into a wall, and I couldn't even be sure what the other side was anymore. I tapped the walls, and they felt like walls. They were even solid enough, but they seemed to flow into place like a liquid. The window was now totally black, and the only light left in this tiny cube of a room streamed through the peephole on the door. I contemplated that I was dreaming, and this was a nightmare. Maybe the whole post-car crash was a knockout nightmare, or maybe I was even in a coma, and this was all that. Maybe I was dead, and this was hell. But none of that seemed right, and this was far too lucid. I don't think you could dream a hangover, after all. And I suppose, even if this was a dream, the fact that I remained, I needed to find Claire. I stormed out of the room, ready to take on whoever was doing this. I was aghast from the moment I stepped into the hallway. Everything was changed. Well, not everything. The decor was the same, but I stepped out of the mini-room into a three-way forked hallway, stretching left, right, and center, with no discernible differences between the options. I started to shout out for Claire. The louder I tried to boom my voice down the caverns, the softer it seemed to be. I staggered in panic forward through the center hallway. The room numbers were mixed up, and some of them were changed numbers as I walked past, spinning like mileage on an odometer. I became mortified when I realized that all the numbers that I walked past were actually counting down. The hallways seemed to breathe as I ran, their pulsating, faint stretch marks in the walls and ceiling. The doors seemed to throb. The lights seemed to brighten and dim as I moved. As the door to the room I left disappeared behind me, I felt like I was reaching a peak on a hill in front of me. I stopped and I braced myself against the walls when I encountered a four-way intersection. I gasped for breath as I spun around, doing eeny, meeny, miny, mo, deciding which way to head next. "Rob!" I heard Claire's voice cry out in the distance of the hallway to my right. I took off right until I noticed the lights turning off in the distance ahead of me. The door numbers spun down from hundreds to near zero in no time, so I did an about face and headed back. I tried to turn right again, and was confronted with another surge of blackness, like a train heading down a tunnel, with me stuck on the tracks. The corridor where I just stood, facing four different directions, collapsed like an origami kaleidoscope into one walled-off dead end, going in only one direction behind me. I heard Claire yell out again, down the only path I could follow, so I ran some more and found myself back in that lounge. I was immediately drawn towards the windows, and to my amazement I found Claire looking in on the floor from the second center window. She was yelling at me, but I couldn't hear anything she was saying. She was pounding on that window with a large branch, trying to break it open. I tried yelling to her, asking her how she got out, but it was no use. I couldn't hear her. I waved her back, and she seemed to back away from the window. I told myself that I needed to leave now, so I grabbed one of the tables and bashed it as hard as I could against the window she was standing behind. The window shattered into large chunks. Each chunk was like a painting or a puzzle with Claire's fragmented image on it. Otherwise, now, where the window was entirely black. I hit the blackness and scuffed it with the table, revealing another image on the outside, but a still image, like the one I had just shattered. I was about to have a complete shaking, crying breakdown, but then I felt a lurch in my stomach, like the feeling you're gonna fall over, or when you're going over a bunny hill on a roller coaster. I felt something brush the top and back of my head. It was one of the wagon wheels, and I discovered that the room was being crushed and flattened from the ceiling to the floor. I fell down the stairs back to the first floor to get lower. The whole room was warped and distorted, like I was in a tunnel of silly putty being pressed closed by some child. I climbed over the canoes and wagon wheels as the only opening in the room became more and more narrow, and I was forced to hunch over and then even jump over the beams as they pressed down to the floor. It was almost out of the room. It was like being squeezed together into a two-dimensional surface from the sides and back, like Salvador Dali squeezing a painting out of a tube of toothpaste. I was crawling on my hands and knees to the threshold just as the entire room folded and turned black. The wall marbled from black back into the faux wood paneling, framing two large doors. And then I suddenly realized where I was. I was back in the lobby, facing the door, but that door was now sealed up. I pressed against the door and gripped the handles to regain my feet. My heart leapt out of my chest as I stood and turned, and I was surrounded by the staff. They were arrayed in 2 rows, left and right, to the front of the desk. Somehow, another 2 rows were stuck into the ceiling. They looked like hanging bats with their arms crossed over their chests, shoes stuck to the ceiling. They were staring at me. And those eyes, Christ, those eyes. Their eyelids were stapled open with 3 staples on each eyelid. 6 per eye, top and bottom. Some of their eyes were pus-filled with yellow weeping down in their faces, soaking into their dark uniforms. Some of their eyes were shriveled black masses like raisins. It was the most disgusting thing I could possibly imagine. Light was disappearing from the right and left as more and more of the staff streamed in from the walls and onto the ceiling until they blocked the door. In unison, they stretched their arms out, fingertip to fingertip, exposed their pale skin. They hung their heads. I watched as red scratches appeared to be carved in their arms. From left and right, I could start to make out words on their arms and those scratches. They read, "We hope you enjoyed your time here. It is time to return. If you stay, you cannot leave, but you are able to stay in your desires here forever." My desires, I choked out. I don't desire this horror. I want out. They wrote back on their arms, "You must like this. We saw it in your eyes." My eyes, they continued. "If you cannot see what you desire with your eyes, then don't use them. Your time is nearly up. Please choose." I saw the ceiling start to descend on me. It was like a huge mouth with teeth coming down on you. I came here with this crushing anxiety on me about Claire. If they could see it, maybe I wasn't actually seeing clearly at all. I took their advice, literally, and shut my eyes and held them shut. In a moment, I saw patterns like beams and spears of light. They were dim and twinkling like stars, but they looked like the outlines of everywhere I really was. I could see the ceiling coming down. I opened my eyes for a second and saw about 7 feet of headspace left. I closed them and sealed them shut as hard as I could. And that's when I saw her. I saw Claire, standing 20 or 30 feet above me, walking on an invisible plane. And then ahead of me was a ladder, made out of the same thin stardust the rest of my surroundings were outlined with, in my closed eyes, in the back of my head. I headed towards, and out of habit I blinked my eyes open, and I realized that ladder was actually the terminal, the kiosk. Somehow the ladder was in the kiosk, but not when my eyes were open. It was only when they were shut. Whatever I was doing, I could only do with my eyes shut and with Claire in my mind. I climbed up the ladder and dared not open my eyes until I was on the same plane with Claire, for fear I would fall or become enmeshed in whatever this realm was. I hurried up the ladder and spilled myself out onto the brightest starry surface that she occupied. The visions left my shut eyes, and I threw them open again to find myself in the mud and the real sun. I rose to my feet and filled my lungs with fresh air as I blinked to get the glare out of my vision, and I looked around for Claire. "Rob!" she shouted, and jumped as I seemed to appear out of nowhere. I jumped back and fell into her by accident, and then I grabbed her and helped us both back to our feet. There was neither embrace nor push away from her. Thanks. Jesus Christ, where have you been? It's been hours. She took her hands off mine and stepped back. She stared at me, and then behind me, and I could tell right then and there somehow all this was over finally. Would that stop me from pretending a little bit longer? I guess not. The ground shook a bit under our feet, and we sprinted out of the loose mud for more solid earth. We turned and launched a bluish glimmer of that stardust. It made a ring around the clearing, and then sent slow beams like comets pulsating through the mud, before the ring and the beams faded back into the mud. We stepped back onto the road, and suddenly the ground seemed to fold on itself, leaving a deep, pitch-black sinkhole, maybe 100 feet deep. The resort, or whatever it really was, had just simply vanished from the face of the earth, leaving this hole. Claire and I were silent for most of the walk back to our damaged car. Whatever we experienced in that resort was real enough that it charged our phone, and we were able to call for help, and it was on its way. Eventually, we just started kind of talking about the whole experience. What the hell happened? Claire broke the awkward silence. After a deep breath, I stammered out, I have absolutely no clue. I mean, I feel like we were on, like, a mushroom trip or something, right? Like, all those people in that huge place. What the hell? Where did it go? She was still breathless, and there was a distinct tremor in her voice. And then something clicked for me. Huh? People? Did you get cornered by the staff with the stapled eyes, too? What the hell? She slapped my shoulder a bit. That's so gross. Well, what do you mean then, people? There were no people at all there. Just the staff that had their backs turned to us at all times because they had those screwed up eyes. Rob, that hotel was packed. I could barely hear you when we met in the club that night. What club? We met in a... And I stopped, and I realized what was going on. And somehow, in a crazy way, all of it actually started to make sense. But even then, I still can't believe the last few words we shared about it, that we shared as a couple. So, you saw what you wanted to see. What did you see when that place started to collapse? I saw what I wanted, I guess. I saw an open window to a beautiful sunny day. I saw a way out. So I took it.